Hey everybody, Mike, you recommended me watching what turned out to be a fucking absolutely fascinating documentary about a very crazy subject. Have you heard of the possible reemergence of these Hopkinsville Goblins?
I mean, not until I heard about this documentary. This stuff was all new to me.
I think I saw a headline of the Hopkinsville Goblins were back somewhere, but to me, it kind of just made me laugh. But watching this documentary really taught me a lesson with that stuff. Like we both admitted many times, we get more skeptical in this older age. And I think that's hindered us a little bit because this is something we definitely should have known about.
Yeah, it is. And I'm glad that I heard of this documentary. Actually, one of our listeners recommended it to us. And subsequently, after having it recommended, I heard Greg and Dana Newkirk on a podcast talking about it, and it fucking blew my mind hearing about all of the shit that they were investigating. And so I definitely had to get into the show, and it's on YouTube, and I think the website is Hellier.tv. But the whole series is on YouTube as well. But it's a crazy little investigation they've got going on, and I think that there's a lot of ties to other sorts of phenomena and other stories that we've talked about and covered on the show before within just these events.
Absolutely. And in watching this, I had to laugh out loud a few times because I literally had to say, God damn, Mike's right. I mean, when you talk about everything being connected, holy shit. This is a prime example of what you're speaking of.
It is. And I think that certain areas, like, so this documentary is called Hellier because of the town in Kentucky named Hellyer.
Not good old Paul Hellyer.
No, it's spelled differently than good old Paul. But this area is riddled with caves. There's a whole network of caves underground.
From mining, right?
Yeah, well, there were natural caves as well, but it's also old mining area. And so most properties have entrances to mines, or they're near entrances to old mines, or there's a cavern in the backyard.
Was that weird for you? Because, I mean, that was spooky to hear that literally they were there. We get to see almost every property has an entrance to an old abandoned mine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you got to think if the village, or I guess it's, I don't even know what they call it. I think it's too small to be called a village, but this area of Hellyer, it was built around the mines. So it would make sense. You know, if you were a mine worker, how convenient is that if you have an entrance to the mine in your backyard? You just stumble out your back door and go to work, and then you stumble home and eat dinner.
Yeah, he actually mentioned that. Greg did. You know, when this town was being formed, you know, they had the mines almost first. There wasn't a town here, but all these miners were tired of traveling to the next town over to go to sleep, so they go down the road and settled there. So this town was really built around these mines.
Yeah, it's like the old gold mining towns out west. And then when the gold dried up, they dried up. But in this case, people stuck around. And I think they said that the population is like under 1,000 or something. It's a very small population. So the whole thing that sparked this investigation was Greg Newkirk used to be in this old ghost hunting group, which I guess this wasn't a real ghost hunting group. It was when he was a kid, basically, and they built this website, and they were, you know, kids pretending to be ghost hunters, basically. But that ghost hunting group had been defunct for a while, and Greg and Dana Newkirk, they run the traveling Paranormal Museum, I think it's called, or Traveling Museum of the Paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a lot of really crazy shit that they go on the road with, and that's kind of their thing. They do like the ghosty stuff. They're not involved in cryptids and things like that typically. But he gets this email from Dr. David Christie. It basically says that he was told by a mutual friend to get in touch with him regarding an issue that he was having. And so Greg gets back to him, and then the guy writes him this huge multi-page email basically telling him that he is the victim of these little creatures that come out of the mines and fuck with them. And the things that he describes are very similar to what happened in the Hopkinsville Goblins case. They approach the house, they knock on the windows, look through windows, knock on doors, make noises, climb on the roof, things like that. And the only difference being, in the case of the Hopkinsville Goblins, they have these big eyes and big ears. And in this case, they've got, he basically describes them as looking like grays, but instead of black eyes, their eyes are blue. But they're exhibiting the same sort of behavior that the Hopkinsville Goblins were displaying.
It's just not afraid of people and causing a fight.
Yeah. They're fucking with people, and that's what's going on.
Yeah, we've talked about the Hopkinsville Goblin thing before, and if you're familiar with it and you read this guy's email, I mean, that's the first thing that's going to pop into your head. That's why I was like, holy shit, this is basically a reinsurgence of the Hopkinsville Goblins. Why didn't we hear about this?
So here's a weird aside about the Hopkinsville Goblins case. There were researchers that looked back into the case after this reemergence, I guess we'll say, and they found that not far from the property was a cavern, and the cavern is allegedly where the UFO that was spotted had landed on that night. So it's kind of, I mean, you've got that similarity right there with the mines. What if the Hopkinsville Goblins case was the first occurrence? And because if you remember, it started with one of the family members seeing a UFO outside while they were out there, and they came in and told everybody about it, and then the UFO landed, and these goblins started coming after I shouldn't say after, but they came onto the property and started fucking with the family. So, and this is also in Kentucky, keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So what if this was the start and they found their way underground and they travel through the tunnels, and that's how they show up in Hellyer and the surrounding areas.
They make a great case for this explanation in the documentary. And we don't want to get into too much detail or give it away, because you guys would love this stuff. I mean, they cover everything. Almost every field of the paranormal is covered in this one documentary. But when they talk about how far these tunnel systems go and the mine systems go, I mean, they almost reach halfway across the country. I mean, anything could be in there.
Maybe it's the Underground Railroad, literally.
For aliens?
Yeah. Well, maybe they're not aliens, though. Maybe they were just something that was here before us, or maybe they are just something we don't understand.
I get that feeling with what they're presented in this email.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly the feeling I get. Maybe I don't get the alien feeling. I think you'll get more into the email, but I think whatever's going on just fucking lives there.
Well, I don't even necessarily believe that it's something like, all right, so I think it's a natural part of our universe or of our world, but it doesn't exist on the same plane of reality that the physical plane of reality. I think there's more to them than that. And this type of thing goes back a long way. If you look at the Hopi legends from the Northwest, they have legends of the ant people. And I don't think they looked like ants, but they were people that lived underground, and they came up and interacted with the Hopi people. and they refer to them as ant people. And then if you look in the Shaver Mystery, he talks about these stone tablets that were given. They were transmitted to him from these things that used to live on the earth, and some still live in the earth, and they're the Darrow, and they're evil, and they want to kill humans, and they're basically trickster spirits that are murderous. And then the good guys are the ones that are transmitting the information to him. So he comes up with all these stone books, and if you remember, he had a stone book library where people would mail their stone books back and forth. Mm-hmm. But so that actually kind of ties in with what's, other than having the tunnels and the trickster beings that live under the ground. There's a tie there, because in the email, Dr. David Christie told Greg Newkirk that a mutual friend named Terry R. Rist sent him his email address and told him to contact him. Now, obviously, if you say Terry R. Rist, it sounds like terrorist, so it's a pseudonym. It's not a real name. So he tried to look this guy up, and the only place this name shows up is in this book called The Secret Cipher of the UFO Knots. And this book, it ties the occult in with communication with extra or ultra terrestrials, and they talk about this. There's a part in the book that's just an interview with this Terry R. Rist guy, and it's stated very clearly in the opening part of the interview that the name is not his real name. It's just the name he goes by. But he has experience with these underground tunnels, and in the interview he's talking about going with a team, and it's really similar. This was in the 60s, but or maybe it was the early 70s, because he was going in with Vietnam vets. But he's got a story that's very similar to the Phil Schneider story.
Absolutely.
And he went into this tunnel with 10 guys, and they got into a firefight with these basically gray aliens, for lack of a better term, but these beings that looked, bald, gray with the almond-shaped eyes. And he said at first they would shoot them, they just disappeared. But he said at one point there was 2 of them that tried to jump him with a net, and he said his machine gun got super hot, so he dropped it, but his sidearm was not affected. So he pulled his sidearm out, and he said he was able to shoot one of them, and once the bullet hit it, he said it like popped and like kind of exploded. And then the other one started running, and he chased it up the incline, but once he got over the hill, it was dark, and the thing just disappeared in front of his eyes. And he said at that point he started hearing gunfire and explosions, and they just made a break for it. And there were only 3 of them that made it out. And out of the 3, one of them ended up dying of leukemia within a couple of years, and he was only in his mid-20s.
Damn.
But it's a very similar story to the Phil Schneider story, which again, he found, he was burrowing in the ground, digging in the ground, and he found this open cavern, and there were beings in there.
Not also does it sound like it supports Phil Schneider's story.
Yeah.
So there's one link there.
Yeah. And I mean, you look at the Shaver Mystery, and it basically fills that in as well. And a lot of the reptilian stuff, take the grand reptilian conspiracy out, where they're, every president and royalty that's ever existed, get that shit out. And look at the, like you were talking about, the lizard man that came out of the cave, the lizard wizard.
Yeah.
And he came out of the cave, and that's a lot of the reptilian stuff also talks about the reptiles having a society that lives underground.
Yeah, and I'm glad they mentioned that in the documentary.
Yeah.
Can't forget about the reptilians. That's where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. They're fucking reptoids.
They like dark places. And baby blood.
Yeah, and then if you look even further into the stuff, there's a lot of other things. If you go even farther back, like the Nordics had the gnomes and the dwarves that lived underground, and a lot of people in the Middle Ages thought that fairies would take you into caves. And they would do things, and this was actually something, I think it was in the first episode. It was when they were interviewing people. They were talking about this cave where there was a legend that if you went to the cave, you'd hear a baby crying, but there'd be no baby in the cave, and the cave wasn't that deep. And that's like a classic fairy thing with, they would try to lure people with sounds of babies or women in distress. And when someone came to investigate, they would get under the spell of the fairies, and the fairies would take them away.
I mean, there's even a preacher that they talked to who said that they called them critters, and they had a critter problem. I mean, it was just like something that they dealt with.
Yeah, it was. It was very matter of fact. It was kind of alarming to hear it like that. Like, not necessarily like whispered about, and he's just like, yo, they got a critter problem. And it's acknowledged.
Yeah, it almost made me think of like the creatures from the Lumberwoods.
Yeah, totally.
It was just like fact. They're like, yep, that's that fucking rock slider.
Yeah, that fucking guy.
The twirly cat. What was it? A whirly-doo cat or something?
I cannot remember any of their names.
That was one of my favorite
they were
things
some of the
I've ever discovered doing research for the show.
Oh, God. I want a copy of that book so bad.
Oh, yeah. I'm getting a tattoo of all those fucking animals for sure.
Yes. A full sleeve of just fearsome critters of the Lumberwoods.
I am down.
That's awesome. I think that this kind of, whatever is going on, I think also can tie into the missing 411 stuff too.
Oh, really?
It's all got a very similar type of eerie thing surrounding it. So here we've got the appearance of these goblins, but that's just the start of it. So I don't want to get too deep into the documentary because I want you guys to check it out. It's fucking awesome. So definitely check it out. But it gets into this mystery of these goblins. That's where it starts. And it just goes down this crazy rabbit hole. And synchronicities are a big part of it. So if you're one to call bullshit on the synchronicities, that probably won't appeal to you. But there is a lot of... There's a little bit of everything. So if you're like a ghost person and you like the ghost investigation, there's a similar aspect to this. At one point they do use a spirit box, and they use it in a way that's hard to call bullshit on, other than if you want to be super skeptic and say everything was planned out in advance. But if you're barring that, it's pretty remarkable the way it worked out. And they didn't use the spirit box in the way that you'll see on Ghost Hunters. The person that was using the spirit box was blindfolded, and he had noise canceling headphones on with the spirit box coming in through the headphones. So he was not being influenced by outside sources, or I should say human sources that were around him. They weren't feet, because a lot of times when you're using the spirit box or something similar, Ouija board, whatever, people kind of feed off of one another, and you could just hear like the slightest thing, and if you've got enough people backing it up, you'll be convinced that that's what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never been too much of a big fan of the spirit box. They've gotten the technology that they use in it down a little bit better, but it was definitely interesting. They said that the guy who does it is very good at conducting these types of experiments, and I think the blindfold was a great touch just for the simple fact of eliminating any outside stimuli, just so he can focus better. But what goes on in that spirit box session is pretty remarkable. I mean, he's telling them what's going on around them without being able to see anything at some points.
Yeah, that was the crazy part. Is just like how he was able to, well, I shouldn't say he, but how the things that he was hearing was relating to what the other members of the group were doing.
Oh yeah, well, and just getting certain words and phrases that were pertinent to what they were researching and investigating.
Yeah, and what they were asking, and yeah, it's crazy. But I think that this, places like this and places like the Skinwalker Ranch, I think that these are places with a similar type of energy. And I think whatever these things are, they're attached to these places or maybe I shouldn't say attached. Maybe they use these places. Maybe they're places of a certain power for whatever reason. And if you go back to the Skinwalker Ranch, before the events that were reported on the ranch, that entire area was said to have been in the path of the Skinwalker, and it was cursed. And if you look at Point Pleasant and all the stuff that happened there, that place was also supposed to have been cursed by Chief Cornstalk.
Mm-hmm.
And another interesting thing is that in the caves in the area where or the area around Hellier, there was also found to be a carving relating to Chief Cornstalk.
Yeah, that's another connection right to Mothman.
Yeah. There's the way that their investigation kind of went, at least in the early stages, minus the Men in Black, kind of followed the same sort of path that John Keels did when he was investigating. Like, he would get all these weird messages and start experiencing all this synchronicity and stuff. But then he had the Men in Black visits, which they did not.
Unfortunately, yeah. But
this, getting back to this Terry R. Wrist guy, he, in this interview, claims to have met with Indrid Cold himself. And the way that he met him was through a stone map that was produced by none other than Richard Shaver. That was basically transmitted or broadcast into his brain from whatever beings he was in contact with. And by putting together these rocks, he was able to develop this map that showed where this house was. So the guy just followed the map and basically went to the house. And he said as he walked up to the door, the owner of the house opened the door, and he said, this is a quote from him. He says, "Mr. Cold?" And he responded with, "My friends call me Indrid." And then he went in and they conversed.
Now, what he said Indrid Cold told him, to me, was kind of like a revelation, because I love Mothman. More importantly, the Woody Derenberger Indrid Cold stuff. And just to even hear the possibility that somebody talked to Indrid Cold again, can you get into a little bit about what Indrid Cold said about why he was there and what was going on with that shit?
Terry R. Wrist, after talking to him, he was told that Indrid Cold and his group were actually fugitives. And all of the messages that they're sending out, including the Mothman, and everything he was saying to Woody Derenberger, and a lot of the channeling messages that are being sent out are their distress signals, basically. But as of that point, none of the other group had turned up, and they were known as the Third Order. So there's a reoccurring thing with the Third Order that shows up. So it shows up in this book, but it also shows up in a couple of the emails to Greg Newkirk.
So there's yet another link.
Yeah. But the Third Order is apparently where these people were a part of, and something happened and they came to Earth, and they've been trying to reach out for any survivors from the Third Order, but they've received no response.
Yeah, that's some gnarly shit. He made some mention about this order wanting to contact humans because they were ready to be a part of this intergalactic type council and represent themselves.
See, that to me is more of that new age alien channeling stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of this stuff, as far as the Woody Derenberger terrorized stuff, and the Shaver stuff too, because the Shaver stuff was also kind of channeled information. But all of that stuff is communicated through cipher. And some of these messages were also sent to Greg Newkirk, like the ink in black. That was also something that was mentioned by Terry Arist in one of the messages he got regarding Indrid Cold. So that was kind of interesting. And then there's a point where they're doing the investigation, and they go to the Brown Mountains in North Carolina to do a separate investigation. But there's for anyone who's not familiar, the Brown Mountains are famous for the Brown Mountain lights, and they're these mysterious lights that show up, and there's a lot of UFO activity there as well. But they go to this cave, and while they're in the cave, it looks like where an entrance would be was kind of covered with this big flat rock, so they couldn't get through. So they're kind of checking it out, and they said you couldn't really tell from the footage because it's a handheld camera, so you're kind of limited on what you can see through the viewfinder. But they said that it looked like this huge flat rock had been deliberately placed there rather than something that had occurred naturally.
Yeah, they said that the way that it was looked, there's no way it could have been naturally. It's just
I mean, they're not geologists, but if you're in a cave and there's a big flat rock covering an entrance, chances are that's not a naturally occurring thing. If it was a cave-in, it would have been the roof caving in or the mouth of the tunnel falling in. You wouldn't just get this big slab that just covers it.
What did you think about them going to this place where there's a supposed entrance to an underground alien base and finding it covered like that?
Yeah, and that's another tie though, because we've got again an entrance to the ground where there's supposed to be some sort of entities below, right, that are alien in nature. Now, not necessarily from another star system, but from another place, from somewhere that's not Brown Mountain, North Carolina. And so they go there, they're investigating, and they can't figure out a way to get in. They come back, and Greg gets an email saying, basically, you were so close, why did you stop? And so that would seem to indicate that whoever is behind these emails was aware of their presence at the mouth of this cave.
Which is weird because they didn't tell anybody, and along with that email, he sent them some numbers, and they figured out it was coordinates, and those coordinates led to the entrance of that cave. So, I mean, I was like, was this dude watching them?
It does seem like he was watching them or somehow aware. Now, what if these emails that were being sent weren't being sent from people or even from an actual electronic source? What if it was just kind of one of those things that was produced through energy of some sort?
How do you mean?
Like, all right, so with if you have technology that's super advanced, sometimes it can, to more primitive beings, it would come across as being magic. So, like, think if you were to take a digital camera into the Middle Ages and take someone's picture and then show them on your screen the picture of them, they would think you are that you are a wizard. And that you very likely stole their soul or something. So I think that through the same way that they're able to communicate directly into someone's mind, that they can kind of, I guess, do the same thing with electronics. So they're not using an actual email server, but they're creating the message and sending it via email. So like the whole thing is just, and that's why when you went to finally, when he tried to email back at one point, it just stopped. He couldn't, the email was dead.
Yeah, he said they were purposely shut down. I don't know how you're able to determine that, but the email address didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I can I see what you're saying. I mean, my wife was telling me she saw some ad where some new phones they're able to share power. So if one phone's dying, you can allow that phone to access another phone and share its battery power and charge it wirelessly.
What?
Yeah, and this is Tesla shit.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's fucking Tesla.
I mean, well, you just think of the wireless chargers they have now. I mean, there's nothing plugged in, but somehow they are sending electricity from these little charging pads to the battery by some receiver. Sure, great, I understand they're able to do it, but this is what Tesla was talking about, and just hearing that, it just, I don't know, that's pretty advanced. And if these aliens have more advanced stuff, I think being able to wirelessly hack into some type of server to send an email is completely possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think that because it's weird when you think about it, because he's getting these emails about this stuff that's going on in Kentucky, but then he gets an email from the same source that has been emailing him about Kentucky, commenting on his trip to North Carolina. So it's, that's kind of a weird connection. Like he led them on the path to the Kentucky thing, and then they were doing a separate investigation in North Carolina, not thinking that anything was related. And then he comments on that. And then they start seeing all these similarities between the two cases, and you've got underground creatures in both areas, along with other phenomena.
And they had said that from the first message from this terrorist guy, from the time that they received his first email to why did you give up so quickly, it had been like 2 months. So they weren't just investigating something else at the Brown Mountain. They kind of gave up on the goblin story. Nobody was emailing them.
Yeah, and when they went to town, they interviewed a bunch of people, and they weren't able. They got some people that had like weird stories, like and there was a weird UFO event that occurred over the area too, where a UFO was just floating over for like 2 hours, and then it just disappeared.
Why hadn't we heard about that? I mean, they had they showed news footage.
I have heard about that one.
Oh, did you? Because it was like Phoenix lights in broad daylight in Kentucky.
Yeah. It was really weird, a very weird occurrence. And there's pictures of it and everything, but it's really weird. And it was there for like 2 hours, and then it just kind of disappeared. Yeah,
I loved hearing them describe people saying that it was there so long that they looked at it for as long as they could, and they had shit to do, so they went about their day.
Yeah, I can relate to that. That happened to me with my first like real crazy UFO sighting.
Yeah, same here with my only UFO sighting. I was like, well, all right, it's been 25 minutes. I got kids.
Yeah. So I can relate to that. But man, it's just crazy how you get all these weird events piling on top of each other. And it seems like he's being guided through all of this.
Yeah, we're not counting all the twists and turns and synchronicities that happen, because it does get pretty thick. It's very strange. I don't know how to say her name, Dana. Okay, the Dana girl says at the beginning, I mean, right away, and she's very intuitive as well. I mean, she handles a lot of the spiritual side of their group. She said it feels like we're being guided somewhere, like we're being coaxed to go somewhere. She noticed that right away. And them mentioning that and her saying that kind of had to spawn that feeling for me, but I definitely see what they were saying.
Yeah.
I kind of believe in more of the synchronicities than somebody was coaching them or setting up things to get them to be certain places.
Right. Like the weird thing is just how it all started from this email to an email address that he barely ever checked. And he just happened to check it when this email came in.
Well, I mean, even how the film was made, the film's director heard a podcast about somebody reading the blog that this guy wrote about it. And he just contacted Kirkman. It was like, dude, let's do a documentary about this. And then all this weird shit unfolds.
Yeah, there's a lot of synchronicities that led them through this whole journey. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on I don't want to get into just because I don't want to spoil any of the documentary for you guys. I think I've given you guys enough to chew on regarding that. But they go down a pretty deep rabbit hole. And it's just so much different shit gets involved. And that's why I love cases like these, because you can't pinpoint what it is. It's not a ghost, but it displays ghosty things. It's not an alien, but there's certainly similarities between alien cases. There's even like weird knocks in the woods that they get at one point, and whistles that come back to them, which both of those things are typically indicative of Bigfoot. Like the people that experience the Bigfoot will say that they'll knock on the trees and they'll hear whistles while they're in the woods. And then there's a lot of similarities to the fairy stories as well. But we've talked about that in relation to alien abduction phenomenon as well, which is why I think this ties in with the missing 411 stuff, because you're dealing with things that like with the missing 411 stuff, the cases where a kid goes behind a bush and disappears completely. No one ever sees him again. He was behind a bush. How does that happen? No, there was no one left the area. No one was on the other side of that bush that carried him off. He literally went behind a bush and disappeared. And that, that seems like something that you'd hear from fairy lore. He went behind a fairy bush and then the fairies pulled him into their fairyland or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But there's throughout history and in various mythology in ancient cultures, there's a lot of stories of these nature beings or tricksters that are earth spirits, and they basically display the same type of behavior that we get from alien abductions and from fairies. It's very similar. They play pranks, they play tricks on people, they abduct people, and there's various ways to appease them and to avoid them, and it's very weird how there's all these similarities, not only in the US but across the world, and a lot of them have to do with underground or with caves.
Yes. Now, when you hear the term earth spirit or something like that, I kind of get the feeling of something that's natural. Do you get that feeling when you hear the term earth involved in these entities?
Well, I think that's humans putting that title on them.
Okay.
But I do think that whatever is going on is a natural part of our world. I don't think that it's demons or something that's summoned. I'm definitely not sold that it's aliens, but I feel like it is some sort of, and I don't want to say spirit, because spirit kind of spirit has a very specific connotation to it, and I don't think that's necessarily what these things are. I think that they exist on a frequency that is mostly imperceptible to us, and they're able to kind of bring themselves down to our level from time to time. And why they do the things they do, that's not for us to know. They work on a different level than we do. It's like trying to explain to a blue jay why you're mowing your lawn. They don't fucking know. Or why the squirrel that's eating out of your bird feeder is getting chased off every time. It's the food's right there. Like, why? What you put the food out? Why you're chasing me away now? It doesn't understand that it's there for the birds and not for the squirrels. You can't explain that to a squirrel. It's just the same way a squirrel can't explain to us why it does the things it does, or why it's different ways of understanding things, and so it doesn't make sense for them to do. And a lot of people, I think skeptics especially, when faced with the I guess I'll say the alien agenda, for lack of a better term, but whatever these things are doing, whatever their purpose is, I think they're trying to ascribe like human reasoning behind it. But what works for us is not going to be what works for them. And they've got their whole own thing going, and it's very different from what we're doing. And they've got their own purposes and their own reasons for doing the things they're doing, but we will never understand it because we are not them, and we don't exist on the level that they exist at. Which is not to say that they exist on a higher level by any means. It's just different.
Yeah,
And
just different.
They've got different capabilities than we have. Just like we can't fly, but birds can. It doesn't mean birds are better than we are. It just means they can fly and we can't.
So can we talk about these footprints?
Yeah. I almost forgot about the footprints.
This Dr. Christie guy who initially sent this email to Newkirk for help with these creatures didn't include anything in the first email, but Newkirk told him, I need some evidence if I'm really going to look into this. And he said he would send him some photographs of tracks, and that he had some trail cams or security cameras, and that he had actually taken photos of the creatures. And I don't want to get into that because it's just like every other alien photo. So you guys can look at that and make up your own mind. But these pictures of these tracks are very interesting. They're 3-toed tracks. They almost resemble a big bird. The tracks are in, I forget what they called it, but it's basically coal mixed with mud. So it has
slurry.
a different slurry. A different texture. So in the pictures he sends, I mean, you can see the dermal markings of the feet. Like the fingerprints are, markings on the feet in this print. And they're very convincing, very interesting. They run into a couple other people who've seen the tracks, and they describe them the same way. And they run into a guy who is familiar with these tracks and knows somebody who worked at a college who found these tracks and had the college investigate the tracks. And what they determined the tracks to be really threw me for a loop.
Well, that was just the one track in the cave that they found. And
yes, but it shouldn't be there. They said that with the dust and how undisturbed the area is, there should be no tracks.
Right.
Especially since they said that the tracks were most likely from a prehistoric bird.
Yeah.
So maybe these aren't aliens. Maybe these aren't woodland creatures. Maybe there's a pack of fucking raptors running around Kentucky.
Dressed as goblins.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was crazy. But they're also not 100%. They said it looks like a prehistoric bird. So maybe it was, or maybe these things have similar footprints, or maybe there's another explanation. Maybe time dilation or time distortion.
I will say that the tracks, the footprints, look to be a little bit too big for what the Hopkinsville Goblins were described as.
Yeah, he said that it was about the size if you took your middle index finger and thumb and that part of your hand and put it in the track. That's how big it would be. So I guess it depends on the size of your hand as to how big it would be actually. But I mean, I would say that would support a 3-foot tall gremlin.
Yeah, especially if he's got 3 toes. Who knows how his support system works, and who knows? I can't say then. Yeah, I'm an a-hole.
And if you remember, the Hopkinsville Goblins were said to kind of float, but they looked like they were like wading through water while they were floating through the air. And David Christie, when he was reporting his experiences, he said that they hopped. So they took these big bounding hops instead of just walking.
That was scary to read his details of these things attacking his house and peering on through the windows of his children's room, and the account of the daughter talking about the bald kids that play in the yard at night.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Super creepy.
Yeah. I mean, holy shit.
Yeah.
If my daughter was like, "Hey, did you see those bald kids playing on the patio?" Holy cow.
Oh God, now you got me freaked out. More freaky kid stuff. Because when I was a kid, my oldest used to talk about the ugly boy.
Ooh.
He never said he was bald. He just said he was an ugly boy.
That's scary too.
Yeah.
But the bald thing, the bald kids,
yeah,
bald head, small size, I would have been like, this bitch is talking about aliens.
That's because we're conditioned to think that way.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I know it's close to Mothman, which gets linked to UFO stuff, and it's
Yeah.
close to Hopkinsville and even Flatwoods and stuff like that.
And I don't know if you remember, but when we initially covered the Hopkinsville case, there was also an incident the night before in Ohio, right across the state line from Kentucky, and where there was a goblin type figure that grabbed a woman's leg while she was swimming.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened the night before the Hopkinsville incident.
Yeah, I just don't get an alien feel from these things. I don't get one from Mothman. They even talk about the Dover Demon a little bit, but it's just strange to me that...
Well, the Dover Demon matches the description. It's a small, diminutive, bald being.
3-fingered hands, 3-fingered toes.
Yeah.
3-fingered toes, 3-toed feet.
Yeah, 3-fingered toes. That's what they are. Every toe has 3 fingers.
But it was interesting to see them mention and connect all this stuff to like our favorite cryptids, these one-offs, these more stranger and more bizarre cryptids.
Yeah, it kind of starts to make things start to make a little bit more sense. Like maybe these weren't one-offs. Maybe we're just looking in the wrong places, or we're looking at separate incidents as being unrelated, when really it's the same thing we're dealing with.
Yeah. So, Mike, at the end, we didn't get to finish the last episode. We're going to try to watch it together at some point and record it if you guys do watch it, so we can have the big conclusion all together. But just the first 4 episodes, what do you walk away from after watching this? Because to me, again, not aliens, but there's fucking monsters that live underground all over our country.
I don't know if they actually live there. Maybe they just kind of use the underground to stay hidden. But I don't know. I mean, if the whole Indrid Cold thing kind of, I don't know how else you would explain it unless they were like dimension jumpers, because he actually talks about coming here. And when he was talking to Woody Derenberger, he said that he came from a country that is weaker than yours. So one speculation that terrorized made in his interview was that this would indicate that the place he came from had been taken over by whatever these gray beings are, and that he's a fugitive from that place, escaped from them, and is trying to look for the third order, which is the people that would have been left behind.
What do you think about the discrepancy between the Woody Derenberger's description of Indrid Cold and terrorists? Well,
he talks about that as well, because so he lumps him in with the Nords, the blondes, the tall, Viking looking people. But he said that they are called that, but that's not necessarily what they are. He said they're similar to humans in that they run the range of different skin colors and hair colors. And so when Terry our wrist met Indrid Cold, he said he had black skin, and he was given a reference to ink and black in the when he was trying to follow this map. And Indrid Cold explained to him that he's able to project his appearance, so he can basically make himself appear however he wants.
Oh, okay. Because I remember Woody Derenberger describing him as not a black man.
Yeah, and with a big smile.
Mm-hmm.
But saying that he's able to project his appearance to any that seems to indicate to me that he is non-physical, and that he's just kind of projecting an avatar, for lack of a better term. He's projecting an avatar into our reality and controlling that avatar.
Yeah, I mean, Indrid Cold would be pretty fucking old, too.
Yeah. So, I mean, unless he's from a species of alien that is able to live and shapeshift, I think it's more likely that he is some sort of non-physical entity that is able to project a physical a physical body into our reality in order to interact with us.
Who knows, man? I mean, I'm looking forward to the last episode, and we would love for you guys to check this out. They're not paying us to say this shit at all, but just so much information and so much weirdness that goes on. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this documentary, because it was so refreshing how they did this documentary. This was the coolest thing I've seen since Unsolved Mysteries. They did a great job. I think that if I wanted to pick an investigative team to do something like this would be them. It was refreshing not to see people being too goofy, not taking it serious. Although there's points, like we discussed before we started, there's some parts that they take too serious. There's sometimes where they're too impressionable, but they're very open-minded. I thought it was just all around done very well. And then, again, the information that they're going to present you with and all the stuff that happens, it's just it's a little bit jarring for the whole paranormal field, because like you said, they're talking about goblins, they're talking about aliens, they do a spirit box section, they go into the woods and get knocks and whistles, so you got Bigfoot there. I mean, and they're just looking for one thing. They're just investigating one thing, and all this weird stuff happens. I'm sure you guys would love this.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of flavor for everybody. And like I said, it's free. It's on YouTube or Hellier.tv. So, be cool and go check it out. And then we can all talk about it. Laugh and chuckle and share our opinions. Maybe thumb wrestle. I don't know. Just go watch it and then talk to us about it. We need friends. We're lonely. We've got a fucking robot.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.